to get here. I'm from the Viroqua area. I used to rotationally graze beef cows up until very recently. I think our area has a lot of issues with this law. A lot of people there do, and I think there should have been a listening session a little closer than 2.5 hours. Maybe Dodgeville would have been only 2 hours, I don't know. But anyway, there are a lot of people in our area concerned, mostly because of our karst geology, a lot of sinkholes, that sort of thing, where you have to take into consideration your manure spreading and so forth a lot more than you would in other parts of the state. So, and there's also a lot of concern because in our area we have a lot of other economic development going on, such as ecotourism. We have a lot of trout streams and so forth, and we also have agrotourism, where people are come to farms and learn about farming and so forth right on the spot. So there are concerns beyond the typical ones that I'd like to talk to a little bit also. The whole reason this law exists is because of risks. There's a lot of risks when you start having lots of animals, lots of people, lots of anything all in one place. And you have to do things to minimize that risk. And with dairy farming or any other kind of large operation, you're basically talking a lot about manure. And so that's one of the risks involved. And I think there are ways to farm. We have to have ways to farm to feed us all that don't have this risk. I did it, I admit it, I was very small scale. I have a neighbor, he raises beef, he does about, I think, 2,400 head. He does an excellent job, and no problem. But he doesn't do it by concentrating the animals. He does it in conjunction with nature by rotating them on pastures. In the years I rotated cows, I improved the permeability of my land, less flooding from that. I improved the organic matter in my land, and I produced a lot of beef. You can do the same thing with dairy. You can do modifications of it with other animals and so forth. And I think that the whole idea of minimizing risk is what this is all about. And the law, one of my biggest problems with the law is that it should be a minimum standard. And then, as a local municipality, a township or a county or whatever, should be able to then enhance that law. But instead, they're making it so we cannot. We have to prove in our township, with our limited budget in our township, prove that there is some scientific reason why something shouldn't be there, something should be modified with this law and put in place. Well, we know in our township very better than the state does what goes on in our township or our county. And that, I think, is the biggest problem I have with it. If I could use the studies that I can find, that any of us could find about these kind of issues from the internet and submit them to DATCP and let our township or county write the rules accordingly, that'd be one thing. But they just dismiss what I think is scientifically proven by a scientific journal or whatever versus what somebody else says is scientific. A friend of mine went to a science conference, and the science companies with the scientists say, we'll get you the results you want. So science is politics as much as anything. And I think that's the biggest problem I have with this law, is that we cannot set the rules on a local level when it makes sense on our local level. There just is nothing that allows it.
My wife and 2 sons. I'd like to thank the DATCP staff for attending today, and Secretary Nilsa Stoon for broadening the topic of these listening sessions beyond simply the scope of the rules of ATCAP 51. I support strengthening the rules to better protect rural neighbors from the impacts of factory farms. The setbacks need to be increased significantly. In my own neighborhood, an Illinois millionaire with a poor environmental record and a membership in the Dairy Business Association has floated plans to build a 3,200 head dairy factory that would require a manure lagoon in excess of 5 acres. This earthen lagoon would be built on a ridge where springs, disappearing streams, and suddenly appearing sinkholes are common. The lagoon would likely be located just a few hundred feet upwind from an Amish community and school. When I plugged the potential numbers into the odor score tool used by DATCP, it appeared that despite its proximity to residences and a school, the mega dairy would pass the current weak standard. My Amish neighbors are not ones to get involved in politics, but I can tell you they are very concerned. Several said it was likely that they would sell their land and move elsewhere. And more than likely, my family would do the same. It would be extremely difficult for me to sell my cattle and hogs and the 40 acres of pasture I fenced with my dad, to leave behind 150 apple trees I had planted, and to abandon all the work fixing up a century-old farmhouse and the thousands of dollars in other farm infrastructure I've invested in. But I would not stay in a neighborhood where a factory farm of this size would destroy our quality of living and leave me wondering every single day how much hydrogen sulfide my sons were inhaling coming off that lagoon, and whether or not our water was safe to drink that given day. The sentiment in my neighborhood is nearly unanimously opposed to a factory farm of this size, and almost all of my neighbors either currently farm or grew up on farms. And yet, because of the Wisconsin livestock siting law, we cannot use our local town or county government to prevent the siting of this facility in our neighborhood. We are essentially helpless. And I believe that is what David Crass and the others that worked to draft this law intended. This is a law whose primary purpose is not protecting the public by regulating the siting of large-scale livestock facilities, but rather it is a law meant to keep local communities from meaningful input into the process. Powerful interests in this state have convinced many in our legislature and administrative agencies that the rights of rural citizens need to be restrained so that Wisconsin can make room for what they label production agriculture or modern agriculture. Despite the fact that my neighbors and I produce milk, pork, beef, chicken, vegetables, maple syrup, apples, and other food products, I know it's not really us they are referring to when they use the term production agriculture. I believe these terms have become popular because those that use them know that the siting of this type of agriculture practiced by myself and others on family scale farms in Wisconsin doesn't require a law to wedge them into neighborhoods, but the siting of unwanted factory farms clearly does require it. The Dairy Business Association says they're busy keeping the cows in Wisconsin. I'm frankly more concerned about keeping the farmers in Wisconsin. We could replace every family-scale dairy farm in Vernon County with a handful of Rosendale-sized operations. But the only people who would benefit from that would be the wealthy outside investors, the bovine growth hormone salesmen, and the industrial-scale dairy processors who want to get their milk as cheaply as possible. Lately, I've heard and read quotes from DATCP staff and board members that it's important that this law strike a balance. I would agree, but I would like to ask exactly who is the balance and who is it to be struck between? The current equation seems to be the interests of family-scale farmers, rural neighbors, and the rest of the citizens of this state on the one hand, and the Dairy Business Association, the Wisconsin pork producers, and their industry allies like Monsanto and VitaPlus on the other. Real balance will require restoring local control. We need to create a regulatory floor by strengthening the statewide standards that should protect our water and eventually our air quality. But we need to allow local governments and citizens who best know their unique conditions to determine where the regulatory ceiling should be. I've been working on this issue long enough to understand that the Dairy Business Association has unfettered access to the highest levels of both our DNR and DATCP. I know that the influence is only likely to increase now that a senior DATCP administrator, whose responsibility included implementing this law, has been hired by the DBA as a lobbyist in the middle of this review process. The lax rules in ATCAP 51 are throwing out the welcome mat to California-style mega dairies and Iowa-style hog factories. And if we let them in, it will be at the expense of our long tradition of family-scale farming in this state. It's time for DATCP, Governor Doyle, and our legislators to realize that this is a law that benefits the few to the detriment of the many. I respectfully ask that DATCP staff forward my plea to the Wisconsin State Legislature that local control be restored to the citizens of this state.